It's been about a week since I last posted. I had suggested that the events surrounding George Floyd's death is an invitation to the gospel and kingdom partnership for us. The unrest and the protesting, the looting and the rioting that's occurred since has not done anything to erode that view for me. If anything, it's brought further evidence to the need of it. I mentioned that the story, our story, the gospel story, our lives are united in at least three ways: the image of God, the universal brokenness of man, and the gospel possibility. As our nation feels fractured and in many ways is, we're reminded of how significant this is. We affirm that we're all made in the image of God, young and old, rich and poor, black and white, and that we're all shattered and strangled by sin. None of us have been spared or left untouched or immune to the darkness of it all. Our lives reflect this reality. We experience the effect of darkness, and our thinking and our behavior is distorted by it. But in the gospel, we don't stop there. We can't. We apply the gospel into our days and into our lives because the gospel is the means, the only means of addressing the brokenness and restoring the image of God and the dignity of all. We are convinced that in the gospel, peace is possible, true peace, peace with God and with each other. And so as people of the gospel, moments like this carry specific invitations. Last week, I mentioned some invitations to you, an invitation to search the contour of our hearts, to find the prejudice that sits in the dark corners and to deal with it, to notice, to watch for, and to see the deep systemic racism that still sits so much in our nation, to be courageous about it, to speak into it, and to speak against it. I know that many of you have grown still, and you have listened, and you have watched, and you have seen. I also know many of you have spoken, and I'm humbled to follow Jesus with you. There's a couple other I'd like to add to us this week, invitations that is. I want to invite you into a day of prayer, fasting, and lament. It's appropriate to lament any crisis to the Lord, to fast and to pray about it. And so I'm asking you to set aside Monday, June 8th, to do just this. If you've never done this kind of a thing before, you can join me as I pray Psalms 13. I'll do that at all my meal times, and every time my stomach reminds me that I've not yet fed it. I also want to invite you to read a couple of things. We're going to read these together as a way to more fully understand. I want to invite you to read Dr. King's letter from the Birmingham jail. In 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. and Ralph Abernathy had led a march through the streets of Birmingham, Alabama. Both were arrested and they were placed in solitary confinement. There, Dr. King penned his letter defending African American resistance and calling for the church to respond. I'd like to invite you to read that. And with that, I want to invite you to read a book written by a guy named Daniel Hill. It's called White Awake. In many ways, it's his story of coming to realize some of the things he had not seen before about race and racism and the history and how it still plays out in our today. I want you to know that when we can start gathering again as a church and as a church family, we'll follow up these readings with a series of conversations. I look forward to doing that with you. I'm struck as I think over the last 10 or 11 days, and a couple of things have become abundantly clear to me. The first is that this is a moment of gospel movement into a deeper kingdom partnership. I remember when Jesus was teaching his disciples and then to us how to pray, and he began that prayer by saying, "Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." There's an implicit call then in there for us as people of the kingdom to begin to bring the kingdom here and now. The second is this. When Jesus calls me home and he asks how I brought the kingdom to earth, as it is in heaven, I don't want to shrug. And so would you join with me as we together begin to explore what God would have for us in moments like this?